It's Rhema Afternoons with Tom and Di.
And we're joined this afternoon by Dr. Robert Carter, normally based in the States, Atlanta, but here in Auckland for a CMI New Zealand Gala fundraising dinner on Thursday night and some other speaking engagements as well. He is one of the world's leading experts on the study of DNA from ancient skeletons dug up around the world to show the migratory patterns of mankind from the Tower of Babel. Now, Creation Ministries International, we've just released a new movie about that called Ancient DNA. Dr. Carter with us on the show. And kia ora, welcome. It is great to have you with us.
Oh, thank you. What a pleasure to be in this beautiful country.
I smiled when you were joining us because I thought, actually, talking about ancient DNA, I wonder if I'm hitting that phase of life myself. Before we get there and talk about DNA, I'd just like to touch on this idea of testing the Bible, but doing it scientifically and why that's important.
Well, for the last several hundred years, science seems to have tried to demonstrate or prove in many people's minds that the Bible simply isn't true, especially in the beginning of the Bible. And so if a Christian is going to have faith, there's questions that come up, automatic questions. How old is the earth? Is evolution true? And we've tried to answer a lot of those things on creation.com, a whole lot of things. We've been doing this for well over 40 years now. But the ancient DNA question that you brought up, that's brand new stuff. That's a field that didn't even exist 20 years ago.
So let's talk about the study of ancient DNA. What are we talking about exactly when we talk about this study?
We're talking about the ability to pull out DNA and information from very, very old remains. So mastodons, mammoths, ancient cave bears, and people. Because after Noah's flood, there was usually about 1,000 years or more before people started writing down history. So we have this gigantic gulf of no history for most of the world, and the DNA of the people in those graves that around the world, we can learn a lot of information, who they're connected to, where they came from, who they're related to, and it's telling a very biblical story, but you would not know it from the evolutionary community.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Well, let's, zero in a little bit. And it's interesting that you say that this is brand new when we're talking about ancient DNA. And I can imagine that this has thrown up all sorts of interesting questions and skepticism as well. So tell us a little bit about the skepticism that comes up when you look at these DNA studies.
Well, the funny thing is that it was the evolutionary community that was skeptical. They didn't think that DNA could last for even hundreds of years because it's a very fragile molecule. Right. And it wasn't until we had really accurate sequencing machines and had developed enough techniques that we could pull DNA out of something 200, 300 years old. But then when someone said, well, how far back can we go? And all of a sudden we have full genomes of Neanderthals, and we now know they're human beings or Homo sapiens. We have full genomes of ancient people living in Europe and in Australia and in Africa. And these are people. It's like all the so-called half monkey, half man things. They're not there anymore. Neanderthal is human being.
And that's really interesting stuff. So why do you think there continues to be this skepticism then? Why do you think people are so reluctant to perhaps embrace what we're seeing?
One reason is that ancient DNA tells us that the Earth is not as old as most people assume, because DNA should not be there. It breaks down too quickly. It cannot last for 100,000 years. It cannot last for probably 10,000 years-ish. The fact that there's ancient DNA is something that was buried by Noah's flood, which biblically was about 4,500 years ago, that shocked me. Absolutely stunned me. What? You can pull DNA out of something that's thousands of years old? Well, if that's true, then the evolutionary community is really struggling with it, because there's claims now of DNA in things that are over 1 million years old. Okay. And I know there's at least 2 research groups that are trying to get DNA out of Neanderthals. And there's chemical evidence of dinosaurs. There's chemical evidence there, but the pieces are broken down so tiny after this much time. It's a technical challenge to be able to pull DNA out of dinosaur bones, but someone's going to do it eventually. Okay. And that's going to tell us they're not millions of years old just from that.
Well, what about this other aspect of the study then that I find interesting in terms of the migratory patterns of mankind from the Tower of Babel? What is the studies revealing or showing us about for lack, well, I guess, dispersion of mankind?
Well, it's telling us that there is only one people group on the planet. We subdivided a long time ago. People went their own way, and they didn't even mix or even meet until, more recent centuries. But the story, the account in Scripture of everyone as one big family, and they got subdivided at the Tower of Babel event, that is indicated in the DNA. We can see people migrating. We can see multiple waves of people coming into places like Europe or Asia, or the African population has huge fluctuations in their people groups as new people came in and overwhelmed the older people groups. So the human story is a story of migration, warfare, strife, and intermixing. And that's true of all people groups in the world. And usually the story is really sad. But that's human nature. Humans are sinful. Humans can be very evil, but humans also can be very nice. And we see that story. We see the nature of mankind, the sin aspect of mankind, the rebellion against God. It's right there in the DNA.
I've never thought of the study of DNA being a form of storytelling, but in a sense, that's kind of what you're telling us, isn't it?
I had a hard time in university choosing between history and biology. I had to choose one of those. And what I found was a science of history, which is DNA. Because when you look at a person, you can sample their DNA. You can tell a lot about their history. Now we can go way back in time and pull people that have been dead for a long time and see how we're connected to them. It's absolutely fascinating.
Would it be fair to say from your experience that at times as Christians we can feel disconnected from science and, in terms of the Bible? So I guess as we talk about this study, what do you think makes studies like this so important for our faith and dealing with Scripture?
That is something that Creation Ministries International has been dealing with for decades, and that's why our website, creation.com, exists. We have put on there thousands of articles on that exact topic. The whole idea of science was basically invented by people with a Christian worldview. We had to get rid of the paganism before science could even work. We needed a universe that could be trusted. You can't do science where there's a Loki or a Zeus or pixies in the garden. You need a universe that's trustable. And we trust the universe because the God of creation created the universe and he's trustable. But over the last several hundred years, science is like, oh no, you're only allowed to use natural processes only. You're not allowed to invoke a God or miracles or any outside forces. And so the way science has been set up more recently, it seems to absolutely contradict Scripture. And so Christians need answers to these things. We need a way to think through these issues, or our faith is false from day one. But if there is a God, God can do whatever he wants. And if there's a God, he is interfering with the natural laws. In fact, natural laws themselves are not sufficient to explain where something like life comes from. Because life is really complicated. Natural laws, they just do random things. So once you have a God, this God can impose order onto the universe, and boom, now you have living things, and now we can talk about biology. So there's all these aspects of spirituality and mixed up with science, and it's troubling, especially to teenagers. Because what they're hearing in school, what they're hearing on TV or on social media, there's very little biblical understanding or even an attempt to link the Bible to science in the world today. And it's tearing them up.
Well, Dr. Robert Carter with us, an expert in this field of ancient DNA. And look, I mean, it's a big field and we could spend a lot of time going into this, but you alluded to creation.com, which is a great place to start when it comes to wrestling with these questions. You can find out more about the movie called Ancient DNA. Under events, you can also find where Dr. Robert Carter is talking. And of course, that fundraising dinner for CMI New Zealand, that gala fundraising dinner on Thursday night. It's also under events on our website, rhema.co.nz. Well, Dr. Carter, look, a real privilege to have you with us in the studio while here in New Zealand. Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Hope everyone comes out for one of these events.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on Rhema. Now, if you found value in today's content, hit that like button. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to our channel with the subscribe button. This really helps us to continue to produce more quality content for you. And hey, if you'd like to stay updated and never miss any of our future videos, ring that notification bell as well. Don't forget to follow us on our other socials, which are in the description below. And until then, stay tuned.